Okay, so once you've done your ladder units from the previous video, you're ready to do your flying geese. Now, you should have 19 of these 2.5 by 4.5 rectangles left over. And also, you will need 38 of the 2.5-inch squares of your background fabric. And we are going to use all of these to make your flying geese first. And then after we've made all of your flying geese, we're going to sew those together into 2 units. So the first thing that you have to do for the type of flying geese unit that we're making, which is what we call a stitch and flip, what you do is on the wrong side of each of the 2.5-inch squares, we draw a diagonal line. So now that diagonal line, all you need to do is just take your ruler, put it from corner to corner, doesn't matter which direction, just from one corner to the other, and draw a line. So remember, this is on the wrong side of your fabric. And if I put that up, hopefully you can see that a bit better. We're going to do that with all 38 of these, okay? So that is your first step. You're just going to take all of these, flip them over so that they're wrong side up, and draw a line. So I use a pencil in this case. If you want, you can use a chalk marker, any sort of marker that's got a pretty fine point will do. So we're going to do that with all 38, okay? Okay, I've now drawn the diagonal line on the wrong side of all 38 of my squares. I'm now ready to start with making my flying geese units. So each flying geese unit, what you want to do first is you want to take your rectangle from the fat quarter fabric, put that right sides up, then you're going to take that square from the background fabric that you drew the diagonal line on, and you're going to put that wrong side up so that you can see the diagonal line. And the diagonal line that you drew is going from this top corner down to this bottom corner, okay? And if I just take that up a little bit closer, so hopefully you can see that. And what we're going to do first is we're actually just going to sew right on this line. Okay, so this first one, what I've done is that diagonal line, I've sewn down that diagonal line so you can see now this top piece of fabric is now stitched onto the other piece of fabric, okay? So if I lift up both edges, it's now sewn on there. So the next step is to trim away the excess, okay? So the excess is this bit in the bottom corner. And what we want to do is we want to trim away, leaving a 1/4-inch seam allowance, okay? So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to turn this. You can do this with a rotary cutter or scissors, but the way to do it with your rotary cutter and your ruler is to take the first 1/4-inch line on your ruler and put it on that stitched line and then cut. So this is now scrap. And so what we've done is we've just basically manufactured our 1/4-inch seam allowance by trimming it after we've sewn the fabric. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take that over to the iron and we are going to press that out, okay? So by out, what I mean is press that away from the center towards that background fabric. Okay, so I've now pressed that towards the background fabric. Now you have to press that before you can put the second square on, okay? So now our second square, it goes on the other side. Again, this is right sides up. We're gonna put this 2.5-inch background square wrong side up so that you can see your diagonal line. Your diagonal line goes from this corner to this corner. And again, we're gonna sew right on that line. Okay, so I've just sewn this second square on. I'm now going to trim the excess. So the excess is going to be down in this corner here. I'm going to lie that down. I'm now putting the 1/4-inch, that first 1/4-inch line from my ruler on the line that I've just sewn, or the stitching line that I've just done. Trim that away. And again, we're going to press towards the background triangle. Okay, so I've now pressed that second triangle out the way, and that's my finished flying geese unit. So I'm going to do that with all these remaining rectangles and the squares that I have here to make a total of 19 different flying geese units. Now, as you make each one, kind of be mindful of how it looks when it's finished. It should, if you get everything absolutely perfect when you sew these triangle units on, it should measure the same size that you started with, which was a 2.5 by 4.5 rectangle. It should again be a 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle. If you're finding that some of them are maybe kind of odd sizes, maybe not quite rectangular, but maybe a little bit skew width, that's probably got to do with just not being exactly on the line when you're sewing down that diagonal line when you've placed your square onto the rectangle. So, and that's just something that you just have to keep working on. The more that you do it, the better that you get at it. So, so make all 19 of those, and then we'll be ready to sew those together. Okay, now I've made all of my flying geese units, and so I'm ready to sew these together. And so I'm going to have one section where I'm going to be sewing 12 of them together, another where I'm sewing just 7 together. And in the case of the 12, it's going to have 3 flying geese from fat quarter 1, 3 from fat quarter 2, 2 from fat quarter 3, 2 from fat quarter 4, and 2 from fat quarter 5. And then the smaller one is going to have 1 from fat quarter 1, 1 from fat quarter 2, 2 flying geese from fat quarter 3, 2 from fat quarter 4, and then 1 from fat quarter 5. Okay, so we're going to start sewing these together as per the instructions. So again, just as we did, see how I've got here a 1 and a 2, they're going to get sewn together. Now, just like we did with our rectangles, they're just going to go right sides together, and we're going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This one in particular, what we're going to do is we're going to press it towards the right, and we're going to just, again, do those all in pairs and then join all of those together to make one whole unit of 12, pressing all of the seams to the right. Right, so here's my first set of pairs together for the first flying geese unit of 12. So there's fat quarters 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, back to 1, and then 2 and 3, 4 and 5, and 1 and 2. So these are all going to get sewn together. And so now that I've got these in pairs, I'm going to join the pairs. I just wanted to, before I do that, show you that each of these I've pressed the seam to the right as per the instructions. And also just so that just to make you aware, when I sew these together, I like to sew them with the point up, because you can either sew it from this side or from that side. But if you sew it with the one where you can see the point where you're sewing, it kind of helps you to make sure that you catch that intersection there of that line and that seam line, so that when you open it out, you don't accidentally cut off the point of that. Because if you sew too far over to the left and your seam allowance is too fat, what you'll do is when you open it, you'll find that you lose your point. So you can just kind of see what you're doing as you go along. So I just wanted to mention that before I now join all of these together to make a section that is 12 flying geese units long. Okay, so I've now sewn that set of 12 flying geese units together, and in each one what I've done is I've pressed to the right when it's sort of facing this way, or if you think of it as your seams are going towards the arrows. So our second set is with 7 flying geese, and if we go as per your instructions, we start with fat quarter 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3. And again, we're going to sew all of these together, and we're going to press the seams just like you did with the other ones. You're going to press them all to the right or towards the point, so to speak. Okay, I'll go and sew all of those together next. Okay, now I've made my second flying geese unit, which has the 7, and again, press the seams towards the point of the flying geese. And when you've got this one made, it should measure 14.5 inches, and this one here should measure 24.5 inches long. And that's all that you need to do for this lesson. We don't need to do anything else with these. We're just gonna hang on to them until we're ready to put them in the quilt.